Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, episode number 414 for the 22nd of September 2016. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia. And no, you don't have to check your clocks or make sure you haven't fallen backwards into some sort of weird time warp and ended up in the future. The Skeptic Zone is early. Normally it comes out on the weekend, as you know. This week it's coming out early to help our friend Ben Goldacre, who is currently touring Australia and New Zealand, and those people in Brisbane. He is appearing tonight. Tonight, you have time to get tickets to see Ben Goldacre. Coming up at the top of the show, an interview with Ben Goldacre. A couple of days ago here in Sydney, I met up with the man at last. Been wanting to meet Ben for many years, and we had a good chat. It's interesting. Ben, what an interesting man Ben is. He likes to say he's an equal opportunity quackbuster. In other words, he doesn't confine himself to the outrageous claims and foolery of quacks and shonks and charlatans. He also applies his critical thinking to a much broader scope, really, to pharmaceutical companies and other people who, sadly, from time to time indulge in dodgy science. Find out more in a couple of minutes with my interview with Ben Goldacre, and information also there about how you too can get to see him in Brisbane or Melbourne, Auckland and Sydney. Following that, it's our reporter Shelley Stocken with a piece about Dr. Google. Now, this is something, of course, Dr. H, our long-time and noted reporter, tackles. Shelley will bring us her angle, her view on Dr. Google. Should you Google Dr. Google? Then to round off the show, another report with the help of our friend Reasonable Hank at the Reasonable Hank blog. And if you haven't checked out that blog, you should, because in the past week, news came to us of a film festival in the state of Victoria who have slated the movie Vaxxed to be shown early next month, I think. Needless to say, this has caused great concern amongst many members of the community. We were contacted by somebody who was very concerned about this. I helped spread the word, and pretty soon, Reasonable Hank got onto the job, and he and his team have uncovered some very disturbing information about that whole sorry affair. But find out more towards the end of the show, where we will be reporting about the proposed screening of the movie Vaxxed next month here in Australia. Now, let me bring up a bit of music here. Oh, yes, that's just delightful. If you haven't heard the Blue Castle podcast, it might be of interest to you. There's a link right on the homepage at skepticzone.tv. Now, this is a podcast put out by my very own sisters, and I'm very proud that they've done this. Now, this is all about artistic women in Sydney who have made a business out of their artistic talents and skills. Nothing to do with skepticism, but since it's my sisters, I'm allowed to promote it. The Blue Castle podcast. I think it will be of interest to many people. Check it out at skepticzone.tv. I'm looking forward to meeting some Skeptic Zone fans and others at the Australian Skeptics dinner meeting with Lynn Kelly, the noted author. And I don't know if there are still tickets available, but those people in Sydney, if you're quick and go to skeptics.com.au, you may be able to snap some up. Also this Saturday, Zone reporter Maynard and I and a couple of friends will be heading out to a paranormal convention for a couple of hours to do some interviews and reporting. It's always a lot of fun. I do enjoy going to paranormal conventions. Or maybe they should all be simply relabeled claims of the paranormal conventions. Maybe whenever you hear the word paranormal, maybe if you put the words claims of the in front of it. I'm a paranormal investigator. Well, no, actually you're a claims of the paranormal investigator. Does that work? And now indulge me, folks, along the same line of thinking, sometimes I wonder if homeopathy is real. what I mean. What I mean by that. If a homeopathic pill or liquid or whatever is simply the lack of ingredients, so it's a sugar pill with no ingredients in it because after the homeopathic processing all the ingredients are removed, or if they were even there in the first place, then, and you're presented with a pill and they say, this is a homeopathic pill. Is it? Does it even exist? Can a homeopathic pill actually be a thing? I should have asked Ben Goldacre that. But now it's time for me to run downstairs, run out the door, run to my car, drive to the tram. Now I'm going to be lazy. I'll just walk to the tram station, or the light rail as they call it here. Travel to Glebe, get off there, walk up the hill, up Glebe Point Road, and find myself in Madame Frou Frou. Cafe Madame Frou Frou on Glebe Point Road, where I often go for a coffee and meet up with Maynard to chat about the Skeptic Zone and other things, and where Maynard and Tim Ferguson record the Bunga Bunga podcast at maynard.com.au. Big shout out to all my friends at Madame Frou Frou. I'll be there soon, and I'll order my favourite, and they know that, which is a flat white coffee with lovely coffee art made by barista Ritu. And, I think some peanut butter toast on sourdough bread, please. If you can have that order ready for me, I'll be there soon. And while I'm enjoying thinking about that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Delighted to be here in Sydney to talk with a man I'm wanting to meet in person for many years now, a man who's appeared on the Skeptic Zone but not since 2009, all the way from the UK. It's Ben Goldacre. Hello, Ben.
Hey, hello. I mean, you say all the way from the UK. I've just been there for a few decades.
Well, still, it's all the way from the UK. I say that because it sounds exotic for the show. You know?
Well, you know, I'm travelling on an Australian passport. In fact, I'd like to do this interview in my Australian accent, if that would be okay with you.
Knock yourself out.
Okay, good. Well, let's go.
Well, good luck. Okay. Well, it's great to see you. You're here, brought out by the people at Think Inc. Mm-hmm. Think Inc., the lovely people who I've worked for before a number of years back. About 2 years ago, I was lucky enough to be the host interviewer for James Randi.
Oh, great.
For the James Randi tour. And you're touring, in fact, your kick-off on Thursday night in Brisbane.
Correct.
Then you go to Melbourne, Auckland and Sydney. That's quite a busy schedule.
Back to back. Yeah, it's a real shame. I was hoping to see more of family and Australia, but there it is.
There it is. So, folks, there's the word before we get further on. If you go to thinking.org.au, you can see the tour details and still have time to buy your tickets. I'm certainly going to be turning up at your Sydney talk, and I'm looking forward very much to that. Ben, we've been following you for years, of course, with bad science and things like that. What was the genesis of putting bad in front of everything? Because there's a lot of people now who do that.
I guess at the time I wanted a label that to make sure it did what it said on the tin. And bad science is fundamentally what I'm all about. I'm interested in how people misuse and misrepresent evidence in every possible sector. So I'm not just after quacks and anti-vaccination conspiracy theorists. I'm an equal opportunities quack buster. So I go for dodgy politicians and PR people, dodgy journalists, but also bad behaviour by drug companies, bad behaviour by academics themselves, academic journal editors, and so on. So
that's really is the crux of what you've been concentrating on over the last few years. And I think it is catchy, isn't it, to put something bad in front of something. It's for the media too. I think it stands out.
Yeah, but also, I mean, although all of my books have slightly smarmy titles, I'm not in the business of just going around saying what's right and what's wrong. I'm interested in unpicking evidence and explaining how it falls short. So really it's just a gimmick for explaining how science really works. you take examples of people getting stuff wrong. And actually, I think that matches the structure of science itself, because science is about critically appraising the evidence for somebody else's position.
Yeah.
It's a bloodbath, it's a fight, but it's a professional one with rules and structures around it. And actually, with my more recent work, like, for example, the Compare Trials project, tracking how academic journal editors respond to notifications. We've been writing a batch of correction letters to academic journals where they've misreported clinical trials. And this has been a really big project, huge team of people in Oxford that we've been running over the last 9 months. And it's really interesting to see how the structures of science themselves aren't working as advertised. So post-publication peer review isn't really working properly. Journal editors and trialists behaving in really fascinating and often quite unimpressive ways when presented with these corrections. So I guess over the course of the last decade, my work has kind of moved on and got nerdier and nerdier as time passes and got into more and more technical corners. But I think, the kind of traditional skeptic audience, and I'm not sure I identify as a skeptic only because I'm just not really a joiner, I'm not a member of a golf club either. I mean, I don't know why I picked that example. It's all the same stuff. It's all people misusing science, misusing evidence, just with different scales of difficulty, I suppose.
This whole thing you bring up about peer review, because it's often held up to be some mythical gold standard of everything. Has it been peer reviewed? Then we don't want to know about it. But as you point out, that's problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been quite queasy about people saying. I've always been quite queasy about any actual kind of. Hey, Dr. Bin, what are your top 5 ways that consumers can spot bad science? And I think when you give people shortcuts like, oh, is it peer reviewed? I think that's almost an authority play. I mean, there's a huge amount of evidence from the research about research literature showing that actually academic journal editors and peer reviewers routinely fail in their duties and obligations. And it's the least worst game in town, but the academic literature is a buyer beware environment. It's there to be read critically by people who know what they're doing, and often things that have shortcomings are published. And in fact, I teach critical appraisal and the basics of epidemiology and trial design in Oxford and at London School of Hygiene. And really the thing that you really learn to appreciate as you teach that over a decade or so is that, obviously all studies have their strengths and weaknesses, and there's no such thing as... Well, it's very rare to come across a perfect study. Every study has to take shortcuts for financial reasons or ethical reasons or practical reasons.
Yeah.
And so you always have to think critically about what the strengths and weaknesses of a study are. Moving on from that, though, I mean, what we've found with a lot of our work, like as I said, Compare Trials, is that not only does peer review not work as advertised, so we know that people are routinely misreporting their pre-specified outcomes, switching the outcomes between registration and the final trial report, which is yet another form of cherry picking of results. Not only are people doing that in their trial reports, but also when you point out that they've done that in a letter to the editor for publication, they're failing to correct the record. So we're finding actually some really quite serious structural flaws in the whole mechanisms that we use in science. And I think, we're part of a wider community of people doing that kind of research methods and reporting work, along with John Ioannidis at the Metrics Institute in Stanford and that kind of thing. And it's a really exciting field because it's about finessing and perfecting the way that science itself operates.
Absolutely. And it brings an interesting point to mind, because I was just skimming through some of your online activities, rating YouTube, for example. And if you go to YouTube and look up Ben Goldacre, there are many examples of Ben Goldacre on there. And I happened to come across one you did a number of years ago debating a homeopath on the BBC. And he's bringing up things which is interesting, like saying, well, of course homeopathy works because we've had studies that show, peer-reviewed studies that show it does work. What do you say to that, Ben Goldacre, you smarmy doctor? But it does bring home, and we almost call that, I don't know if you're familiar with the term gish galloping. This is where you just load somebody up with endless studies they can't possibly refute on the spot. But I think you did a pretty good job in that situation.
Well, I think the interesting thing about homeopaths to me is that they use the same tricks as drug companies setting out to promote a new product. I mean, it's all part of the same. It's all part of the same project. I mean, the homeopaths use those tricks in slightly cruder, more crass and obvious ways. But, you see gish galloping from drug companies when drug reps go out to promote products. You see cherry picking from drug companies, but you also see cherry picking from non-industry academic funded trials. There's this global problem, which I'm sure you know about, which we've been campaigning on with the alltrials.net campaign, of people withholding the results of clinical trials after they've completed. And it's not just drug companies that do that. It's also people doing public health trials on promoting exercise. It's surgical trials. It's trials of talking treatments for depression. Across the board, you see cherry picking, and so I guess I wouldn't identify homeopaths as a unique category of misusers of science. I think they're part of a broader picture of people misusing science in order to promote their favoured intervention, whatever that might be. I do actually think, though, that the one thing that quacks do to warrant attention online is that they behave on a personal level in a very kind of colourful and childish way. And I kind of sometimes I feel sad. I feel like the skeptic community don't go after meteor targets, by which I mean bad behaviour by academics or academic journals or drug companies, but I feel like I can understand why, and I think a lot of it is down to colour. When you go after a homeopath and you point out that they're wrong, they don't engage with you on the evidence generally. They will sort of, research you on the internet and publish smear stories about your sister, or they'll try and contact your boss and have you silenced, or they'll publish some wildly defamatory series of smears, or they'll go off on some giant conspiracy theory about the pharmaceutical industry. They'll behave in ways that kind of naturally draw you into a kind of colourful engagement about how awful they are as people. If you go after somebody who's a little bit more professional, then they'll be advised by a very competent reputation management arm of their company, or by an independent PR firm who'll just go, look, if they've landed a good hit, just walk away. Just leave it. Just go. Move on. And so, they don't draw you into such a colourful series of spats. So I think that's partly why quacks get so much attention online.
I think so too, and especially in the media, because at the end of the day, many media outlets are after the juicy story, the interesting story, the story, as we say, will get bums on seats. And if that story is you versus a homeopath, that's an easy story for them, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, as I say, you do find the same patterns of behaviour the world over. And I suppose to undermine my previous point, just for a moment, one thing that we found with the Compare Trials project, which absolutely amazed us, was... So just to backtrack a minute, Compare Trials is this epically nerdy battle. So there's a long-standing problem in clinical trials research. You're supposed to correctly report your pre-specified outcomes. So when you do a clinical trial, you don't just say, we're going to measure cardiovascular health, because you could measure that in so many different ways, an infinite number of different ways, that you could cherry-pick and get a positive finding from even an intervention that had no benefit at all. So you have to pre-specify exactly how you're going to measure, say, cardiovascular health, so which blood test you're going to use, what cut-off value you're going to have for a positive or negative finding, which diagnosis you're going to measure, so is it going to be myocardial infarction, if so, how you're going to diagnose it, that sort of thing. And then when you come to report your clinical trial, you have to make sure that you report the outcomes that you said you were going to report. So it's about predefining your success criteria for your intervention. Now, we've known forever in medicine that if you don't do this properly, that your results are biased and exaggerated, because it's just another form of cherry picking. And we've known this forever, and we've also had things like the CONSORT guidelines, which are the guidelines on correct reporting of clinical trials. Now, all the academic journals that you've heard of in the world have signed up to the consult guidelines. They've all said, yes, we're going to require trials to be properly registered and have a protocol, and when they report their results, we're going to make sure they report the outcomes that were pre-specified before they started. And yet, there have been about 30 studies published showing that academic journals actually don't do that. They allow people to engage in what's called outcome switching, where they switch in and report different outcomes to the ones that were pre-specified. So, we didn't want to do yet another prevalence study where we say, hey, we looked at this and we found that 40 or 60% of all trials misreported their pre-specified outcomes. Instead, we wanted to engage in what was, if you like, a kind of academic activism, in one sense, where we set out to measure, to assess for every single trial published by the big 5 journals, so that's New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Annals, Lancet and BMJ, for a 6-week period, every single trial we assessed. Wherever it misreported its outcomes, we didn't just quietly write that down and publish an overall prevalence figure. We wrote a correction letter to the journal saying, hey, you've signed up to the consult guidelines on correct trial reporting, but this trial misreported its pre-specified outcomes. These are the discrepancies. We think you should correct the record. So this was really a project about, firstly, trying to correct the record itself, but also, secondly, more importantly, trying to see what happens when you try to correct the record. And the answer is you see spectacular variation between journals and between trialists in how they respond. But you also see really very bad behaviour in some cases. So some journals instantly issued corrections, like BMJ, for example. Other journals rejected all of our letters and said, oh, actually, we don't care if people transgress the consult guidelines, despite the fact that they've been publicly listed as endorsing the consult guidelines forever. Some journals, like Annals, published this extraordinary, 2-page, really a kind of denunciation, the sort of thing that you'd see on a homeopath's blog, in which they said things that were simply not true about our methods. We shared all our data as we went, so anybody could look and see our raw coding sheet, so they could see exactly what we were classifying as a correctly reported or misreported outcome. They said that we classified things as incorrectly reported when we hadn't in some cases at Nedgem. Just extraordinary behaviour.
It's face-saving. A lot of people are face-saving, aren't they?
I suppose at best, you could call them motivated misunderstandings.
And
again, so one of the things that happens in sort of skeptic spats with homeopaths is somebody writes something really stupid on their own homeopath blog, and then you try and correct it in the comments section, and they delete your comments and won't allow you to do that.
Yes, that's a very common situation.
So we found exactly that in the pages of the Annals of Internal Medicine.
Wow.
So Annals of Internal Medicine published this 2-page denunciation that was riddled with things that were just simply factually untrue on real black and white issues, also internally inconsistent. So this is all very familiar from the world of engaging with homeopaths online.
Absolutely.
And when we attempted to submit corrections for publication online and in print, they simply rejected them out of hand. So I wrote, I've written a piece in Nature about this. We're publishing our paper on the response of journals to our cohort of correction letters, and also a separate paper on the responses of trialists. But what I find absolutely fascinating is, as I said, the commonalities between the way that homeopaths respond on their blogs when you criticise them, and the way that the academic journal editors from the biggest academic journals in the world respond when you point out that they have fallen short in absolute, unambiguous, proven black and white terms, and really you couldn't put a cigarette paper between them. And if you want to find out more about that, if you go to compare-trials.org, you can see everything that we've been doing in the Compare Trials project, and I think it's interesting and fun.
Well, I'll certainly add a link to that on this week's show notes, folks. Here's the word. Come and see Ben Goldacre live in person. He'll be in Brisbane on the Thursday the 22nd. Friday the 23rd, we'll see him in Melbourne. For you folks in Auckland, he'll be there on Saturday the 24th, and right here in Sydney on Sunday the 25th, where you can enjoy Ben's talk and pose questions, which is an important thing during the show, which will be something to look forward to. For more information, head to thinkinc.org.au to snap up your tickets. And you can always visit badscience.net to find out more about Ben Goldacre. Well, Ben, after all these years, it's a great pleasure to meet you in person. It really
thanks,
is.
Chief. Nice to meet you too.
And thank you. And we certainly look forward to the upcoming talks.
Cool. Cheerio.
toss a coin 100 times and I'm allowed to withhold from you the answers half the times, then I can convince you that I have a coin with 2 heads, okay? If we remove half of the data, we can never know what the true effect size of these medicines is. We cannot make decisions in the absence of all of the information. In science, we don't care how many letters you have after your name. In science, we want to know what your reasons are for believing something. How do you know that something is good for us or bad for us?
An evening with Ben Goldacre. Homeopathic hucksters, nonsensical naturopaths, anti-intellectual anti-vaxxers, slippery statisticians, the journalists daring to declare meats as critically carcinogenic. Let's not forget fraudulent pharmaceutical firms. So when the public is kept in the dark about the detrimental duplicity of these declarations, how many scientists does it take to screw in a light bulb that illuminates the facts? Just one. Dr. Ben Goldacre shining a light in Australia and New Zealand this September. An Evening with Ben Goldacre is brought to you by Think Inc., the folks behind the Australian tours of Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, James the Amazing Randi, Steve Wozniak, and many more. Ben Goldacre will be speaking in Brisbane, Melbourne, Auckland and Sydney, and to get your tickets visit www.thinkinc.org.au. And I hope to see you at the Sydney Talk on Sunday, the 25th of September. Interesting claims, questioning, take stock with Shelley Stocken.
Hi, I'm Shelley Stocken, and this week I'm paying Dr. Google a visit. Back in 2011, Dr. Raichi gave a talk entitled Diagnosis by Dr. Google, in which she discussed the increasing number of Australians self-diagnosing illness by searching for their symptoms on the internet. I'm interested in what's changed since then. So let's go back through the spooky mists of time. Not far, though. 5 years ago, about 80% of Australians had access to the internet at home. Mobile devices were really starting to hit their straps as internet accessing machines, with about 11 million mobile subscriptions. And about 93% of people on the internet used Google as their search engine of choice. Even my dad was warming up to the idea that the internet was a faster and more convenient source of information than the local library. Now let's zip forward to the present day, or at least to December 2015, when the Australian Bureau of Statistics last published details of Australia's internet use. The recent figures show that roughly 86% of all Australian households are connected to the internet, an increase of 6% since 2011. There are just over 21 million mobile handset subscriptions, and Google is not only used as our favourite search engine, it's now one of our favourite verbs. So what's changed as far as Dr. Google is concerned? A little, but not a lot. We still use the internet to research symptoms, medications, and other health-related information. Perhaps because of this, the number of sites offering good quality, reliable health information has increased. Unfortunately, an increase in the number of sites offering evidence-based health information doesn't necessarily mean the proportion of reliable health information has increased. It's still very easy to find unverified, misleading or dangerous health information on the web, and just as easy to post it there. And even the most reliable, evidence-based, trustworthy health information can be useless if it's used in the wrong context. Overall, we seem to be getting more innovative with the way we use the internet to manage our health, creating more convenient and interactive ways to get advice, tests and treatments online. For example, internetdoctor.com.au is an Australian site that allows patients to discreetly order sexual health tests online. and there are an increasing number of telehealth services available to remote and regional users, providing access to medical practitioners via online video consultations and other electronic means. As far as self-diagnosis goes, however, we seem to be in the same habits as we were 5 years ago. Google is just too damn convenient, if not completely accurate, to overlook as a symptom-checking contraption when you have a sore throat and you want to know if it's just a cold or that rare neck-eating parasite you've heard about. I decided to do a little experiment to compare Dr. Google with real doctors. I entered 3 symptoms into Google one by one. For each symptom, I recorded the first 3 possible diagnoses that came up in my search results, regardless of where they came from. Then I compared those possible diagnoses with advice from a range of medical experts, including a GP and an emergency specialist. The questions I asked the doctors were, what would you ask the patient? What tests would you do? And, in your experience, what's the most common diagnosis for this symptom? Symptom 1 was a 3-day headache. When I entered 3-day headache into Google, the first 3 suggested results were a brain tumour, aneurysm or migraine. The human experts I consulted would ask questions such as, what other symptoms do you have? What medications or alternative therapies do you use? Have you had a headache like this before? And what's your medical history? They said they would perform neurological tests for weakness or abnormal reflexes, check for fever and infection, and, depending on the patient's medical history, order CT or MRI scans. The most common diagnoses for persistent headaches are, according to the doctors I asked, migraine or tension headache. The next symptom I asked Google about was swollen ankles. Google offered up heart disease, kidney failure or liver failure as the first 3 diagnoses. When I asked my medical peeps, they said they would want to investigate any recent ankle injuries, any history of heart disease or varicose veins, whether the swelling is worse at certain times of day, and the medications or alternative treatments the patient is taking. They would listen to the patient's heartbeat and check their pulse, examine the legs for DVT, check their lungs, skin and eyes for inflammation, and, if heart problems were suspected, order cardiac tests such as an echocardiogram or electrocardiograph. The most common diagnoses for swollen ankles my experts came across were varicose veins and fluid buildup. The last symptom I asked Dr. Google to consider was a sharp pain in the belly. Dr. Google quickly served up appendicitis, gallstones and pregnancy as possibilities. My real-life doctor people wanted to know how long I'd had the pain, whether I had any other symptoms, when the pain was at its worst, what my bowel movements were like, what medications or alternative therapies I used, what my diet was like, and my medical history. According to my chosen experts, the most frequently diagnosed conditions for this sort of abdominal pain are gastroenteritis and constipation. To sum up my not very scientific findings, there's no question that Dr. Google beats human doctors hands down for speed, convenience, and the sheer volume of information it can provide for self-diagnosis of symptoms. But it's not nearly as good at asking patients the right questions and making educated deductions from patient responses as a 3-dimensional human doctor. Google can't spot a skin cancer, hear a heart murmur, or feel that squishy bit on your leg. Now, as in 2011, Dr. Google must be used with caution.
The Skeptic Zone Live, a special live recording of this very podcast at the Occidental Hotel in Sydney, just near Wynyard Station, 43 York Street. This is part of Skeptics in the Pub. Join me and the Skeptic Zone crew for live reports and interviews, prize giveaways on the night. everybody's welcome, but for more information and to reserve your place, visit meetup.com/AUST Skeptics. There will be a link in this week's show notes. See you there at the Skeptic Zone live Thursday, the 6th of October, at the Occidental Hotel, starting around 6 p.m. Now it's come to our attention in the last week or so that the documentary, you can't see the air quotes, Vaxxed is slated to be shown here in Australia at a regional film festival, which is the Castlemaine Local and International Film Festival, or CLIFF, CLIFF for short. Now, this is in the state of Victoria. Now, I was contacted a little while ago by a concerned member of the public who noted this movie was slated to appear, and since then this story has really developed some legs. It's really taken off, and I think the best summary of this affair can be found once again at Reasonable Hank, reasonablehank.com, where Hank and his snoops have come up with some very interesting information indeed. Let me give you an overview of Hank's blog post on this issue. As posted on the 20th of September, Victorian Film Festival embroiled in anti-vaccination social media trainwreck. On Friday the 16th of September, a little before lunchtime, I was alerted to an upcoming showing of Andrew Wakefield's dishonest anti-vaccination vanity film Vaxxed at a Victorian regional film festival called CLIFF, Castlemaine Local and International Film Festival. The festival has been promoted by the president of the discredited Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network, Tasha David, on the No Jab, No Pay, No Way anti-vaccination protests event page. And Hank provides us with the screen capture there. There is a film festival in Castlemaine, Victoria that will be showing Vaxxed on October the 8th. If you can get there and support the first official screening of this must-see documentary, please do, and together with a link for tickets. Hank goes on, I tweeted that screenshot along with the following screenshot from the Cliff webpage featuring the anti-vaccination film. Of note, please see Who is Cliff tab at the top of this screenshot. We'll need that for later. And Hank once again provides us with a screenshot from the festival's main page. And at the top, there is a link, a tab that says Who is Cliff. Tasha David also promoted the festival on the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network Facebook page on Friday. And once again, the screenshot is provided with her posting. Tasha David shared it on the AVN Facebook page on Saturday. Once again, another screenshot. Tasha David also promoted the event in the Vaxxed Australia Facebook group with more screenshots. Hank goes on, when the president of a disreputable, callous, anti-vaccination organisation, which is the recipient of a public health warning, is your ally in the promotion of one of your films, you really need to sit back and introspect, don't you think? Wouldn't you? That Vaxxed is a dishonest exposition is not news to the evidence-based researchers, health professionals and journalists. For an exquisite explanation of the, quote, CDC whistleblower in, quote, manufactured controversy, which is at the heart of the subject matter, please refer to this post. MMR, the CDC, and Brain Hooker, a guide for parents and the media. And you can click that link if you visit this blog, which I will be linking to in the show notes. In a film review for The Hollywood Reporter, infectious disease specialist Dr. Paul Offit wrote, if MMR really does cause autism, why haven't the link been found in 15 other studies? many of which included African Americans, and almost all of which didn't involve the CDC. Are there other whistleblowers who just haven't come forward yet? The real explanation for vaxxed revelations isn't conspiracy or hidden data, it's something else. When compared with their Caucasian counterparts, African American boys in Atlanta in 1994 were undervaccinated. In order to qualify for autism support programs, this subset of undervaccinated children with autism had to get vaccinated. In other words, it wasn't the MMR that caused autism, it was the diagnosis of autism that had caused them to get MMR. Not surprisingly, this is never explained in the film. And Hank goes on to quote some more examples from the media, which you can peruse for yourself. On Friday, I tagged Cliff in a tweet after finding their handle. Cliff deleted their Twitter account within the 2 following days. Many others also tweeted their displeasure at the festival organisers. And we have a screen capture from Reasonable Hank himself, and his tweet says, "Film festival organisers at Cliff0408986 care little for the health of babies. Hashtag Stop AVN, hashtag Jill Hennessy MP, hashtag SpringST." Cliff responded to both me and my friend Shelley, by the way, is our reporter Shelley Stocken, with the same response, which was aimed at claiming disinterest in the subject matter of Wakefield's fraudulent film. And the tweet from Cliff reads, "At reasonable_Hank, we hope you have seen the movie. We don't necessarily agree with the ideas in any film shown. We want viewers to decide." Those of us who have been following the tactics of the anti-vaxxers and their apologists for some time knew precisely what was at play, an attempt to frame the film's viewing as a legitimate debate between equal opposing camps, which it is not. Philosopher Dr. Patrick Stokes is one of those who is well versed in the tactics of the anti-vaccination lobby and its supporters. And Patrick Stokes has tweeted, as seen via a screenshot, "Not good enough. This is not a difference of opinion topic. Why are you giving platform to anti-vax lies?" Hank goes on, "What followed was a social media train wreck, which was played out in an attempt to erase questions of organizer bias, which would cast doubt on Cliff's attempts to appear to be merely a disinterested player, a provocateur of uneasy disclosure." Now, Hank puts up a new screenshot and says this screenshot was taken from a Wayback Machine snapshot on August 13th, 2016. As we can see, the Who is Cliff tab, as referred to earlier, clearly shows that the leading organizer, or at least the top position of the list of organizers, is Nikki Valentini. And Hank has that screenshot, and Hank goes on to say, "After me and many friends started looking into the organizers, the Who is Cliff page was deleted from the Cliff website. Thanks to friends with swift minds and quick fingers, we were able to retain this screenshot of an anti-vaccination post promoting Tasha David's anti-vax petition from the Facebook profile of Cliff organizer Nikki Valentini." And the posting is a meme. There's a little baby there, a young child looking a little bit sad, I suppose. "There has to be a choice. Minister Scott Morrison, don't punish parents for making an informed choice about their children's health. All parents deserve ... And it's a link to a petition on change.org. The profile, and therefore the anti-vaccination post as well, has been deleted from Facebook. But it wasn't deleted before Valentini attempted to hide her anti-vaccination affiliations with a quick attempt at a name change. So where before the posting had her own name, the new posting, which is identical, is under somebody called Birdie Num Num. We expect this behaviour. In fact, we are surprised when an organiser or a venue holds up their hands immediately and says, quote, "Fair cop, we were wrong," end quote. It doesn't happen very often. Sometimes it takes a while for a venue or an organiser to acquaint themselves with the subject matter before making a decision in the interests of public health and babies. Usually, once a venue works out that they have been taken for chumps by the anti-vaccination activists, like the venues who all cancelled events for the 2015 speaking tour of public health enemy Sherry Tenpenny, they will do the right thing, especially when it starts looking awkward for public relations and the shareholders. But we are very used to anti-vaccination apologists trying to treat everyone like chumps, like they don't have any skin in their particular game. They do. They just know how bad it looks, so they attempt to hide it. And all the babies can go to hell. And Hank ends this post with a very interesting note. One of the partners of the film festival is the Mount Alexander Shire Council. The Mount Alexander Shire Council's immunisation page is here, link provided. The Mount Alexander Shire Council's contact page is here, also another link. This is a very important issue on this matter, and one that our own Heidi Robinson, the raw skeptic from the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters, took full advantage of, and she wrote to the Alexander Shire Council. Here is her letter. From Heidi Robinson. I am writing to express my dismay that your partnership with Cliff, Castlemaine Local and International Film Festival, essentially means that you are lending them support for their screening of the anti-vaccination documentary Vaxxed. I find it disturbing that as an Australian government agency who supports immunisation, with a link to their very own page on the topic, that you would lend your support to such an event. This event is, purely and simply, a threat to public health. The person who made and produced this film was struck off the medical register after he was found guilty of fraud and unethical medical procedures on children relating to his fudged data surrounding the MMR vaccine. This is not, as these people would have you believe, an issue of free speech. The makers and producers have made their statements and positions quite clearly in many media outlets and social media platforms, so they are hardly being suppressed. Council does not have to support the platform for this dangerous nonsense, and I would appreciate it if you withdrew your support and made a public statement to this effect. Thank you for your time. And here's a letter written to the Council by Sarah Turnbull, who also kindly got in touch with me. Dear Sir or Madam, I am writing to suggest that the Council make up for its involvement in showing Vaxxed, the anti-vaccination documentary, by making a donation to the following charitable fund, with a link to Light for Riley. This fund was set up by the parents of Riley Hughes. This might go some way towards addressing the public health and public health relations disaster this incident has caused. And our reporter Shelley Stocken has also chimed in. Dear Mount Alexander Shire Council, I am concerned about your partnership with the Castlemaine Local and International Film Festival, as I feel it represents a conflict of interest with regard to public health. The festival is unapologetically showing the anti-vaccination film by, struck off, Dr. Andrew Wakefield, which misleadingly brings into question the safety and effectiveness of childhood vaccines, with no reliable evidence to back it up. Given your commendable support for and provision of immunisation services in the community, your partnership with this film festival sends a conflicting message. I fear that the film will discourage viewers from vaccinating their families, as previous publications and campaigns by Wakefield have previously done. I understand that the Cliff organisers are free to show this film at their festival, but I do not understand why the Council, so clearly committed to vaccination as a public health initiative, would support it. Thank you for the opportunity to express my concerns. And by now I imagine there are many, 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 many more letters of a similar theme flooding into the council chambers. So thanks again to Reasonable Hank and his merry band, I guess you would say, for doing such diligent and good work in finding out a lot about this issue. And it's also, I noticed, been reported in other media outlets. And thank you also to Fiona O'Leary, all the way over there in Ireland, who was a guest on the Skeptic Zone way back in July this year, who has also been fighting against the movement behind Vaxxed in her part of the world. She was horrified when she learnt that this film was to be shown in Australia, and she actually sent me some very good advice indeed about that. So thank you, Hank, thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Heidi, for all helping to contribute to this story this week. And we will keep Skeptic Zone listeners up to date as this story progresses.
You told me that aliens really exist. You met them and swooned.
Sziasztok!
Всем привет!
Hejsan allihop!
Guys, I just had the most amazing experience.
What experience, Andras?
Andras, have you been to the pub? I told you not to hang out with Marsh. You know he was blessed by Peter Popov.
No, Yelena, I'm not talking about psychics. It was a real ESP experience.
You have been to the pub. Either that or you've been smoking something.
No, Pontus, the ESP is the European Skeptics podcast. It's the most amazing thing. You get to know so much about skeptics and their activities across Europe. You know, events, hot topics, and interviews with lots of interesting people.
Oh wow, cool. By the way, Pontus, you just committed the false dichotomy fallacy.
I guess that means I'm really wrong.
Yep. And you can even learn about those fallacies in the show and hear about people spreading silly ideas. You should really check it out. It's the ESP, the European Skeptics podcast. It's on every week.
Alright, so where can I get this ESP experience? It sounds good.
You can go online at theesp.eu, follow it on Twitter at espodcast_EU, or like the podcast on Facebook. Oh, and you can also contact the show by sending them an email to info@theesp.eu. And if you want to subscribe, do a quick search for the European Skeptic podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, or Stitcher.
I don't know how you can believe.
Thank you for listening to the early Skeptic Zone this week. And for those of you in Sydney, Auckland, Melbourne and Brisbane, I hope you have the chance to get along and hear Ben Goldacre live on stage. And those people in Australia, the interviewer on stage will be none other than Dr. Brad Mackay, well known from the TV show Embarrassing Bodies Down Under, and a member of Australian Skeptics to boot. Coming up on next week's show, I think we'll be bringing you reports from the paranormal convention Maynard and I will be heading to soon. Also, hopefully, chat with the author Lynn Kelly, who will be speaking at the Australian Skeptics dinner meeting in a couple of days. But for this week, with Henrietta and Maud actually locked out of the office, the studio this time. Sometimes I can see little paws coming under the door, trying to get in. They do like being with people. For this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for contacts, an archive of all episodes since 2008, and our online store. Please support the Skeptic Zone by following us on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, liking us on Facebook, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can also show your support by subscribing via PayPal for as little as 99 cents a week. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics Inc. or any other skeptical organisation.